Eleanor Vane planted both feet on the frozen mud of Black Hollow's main street, looked straight at the man who had paid $40 to bring her here, and said in a voice that did not shake, "If you're going to send me back, say it now. I won't stand here and be inspected like a mule at auction." Cole Mercer said nothing. That silence was its own kind of answer. If this story moves you, please subscribe to this channel, hit that notification bell, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Every comment, every subscription, it tells me you're out there, and it keeps these stories coming. Now stay with me, because what happens next on the Mercer Ranch will change everything you think you know about worth and belonging and what it truly means to be chosen. The stagecoach lurched to a stop at 4:30 in the afternoon, and Black Hollow, Colorado, did what small towns always do when something unfamiliar arrives. It stared. Eleanor Vane was the last passenger off. She had waited deliberately, letting the other travelers collect their bags and scatter into the gray November cold, because she had learned long ago that an entrance made alone without the cover of a crowd was the only kind that told the truth about a person. She gripped the handle of her carpet bag, dark brown, worn smooth at the corners, repaired twice with her own needle, and she stepped down onto the running board and then onto the street, and she stood there in the wind without flinching. She was 31 years old. She was not small. She had never been small. Her frame was broad and solid, the kind that drew attention, not because it was theatrical, but because it was simply undeniably present. She wore a dark wool traveling dress, the color of river mud, a practical cut, nothing ornamental, and a gray coat that had belonged to her mother and still held its shape. Her dark hair was pinned back clean and tight. Her face was calm. It had taken years to make it that calm, and she wore that calm like armor. The street in front of the stage depot was not empty. A cluster of men stood near the feed store across the road. Two women in good wool coats paused on the boardwalk in front of the dry goods. A boy of about 12 sat on a barrel and watched with the uncomplicated curiosity of someone who had not yet learned to disguise his interest. They all looked. They looked the way people look at something they were not expecting, which is to say they looked too long and then looked at each other. Eleanor did not look at them. She looked for Cole Mercer. She had his description from the correspondence. Tall, dark-haired rancher would be holding her name on a piece of paper or standing near a black horse. She had written him 6 letters over the course of 3 months. He had written her 4. His letters were short, direct, practical, almost terse, but they had told her what she needed to know. He needed someone who could run a household. He had 3 ranch hands and a cook who had quit in September. He had a harvest supper coming up in 3 weeks that the community was depending on him to host. He did not have time for complications. She had written back and told him she understood complications and how to manage them, and that she could have his kitchen running properly within 48 hours of arrival. He had sent the ticket. She found him standing at the edge of the boardwalk near the stage depot door, and the moment she identified him, she knew. She had seen that particular expression on a man's face before. It was not cruelty exactly. It was recalibration. It was a man rapidly adjusting the picture in his mind to match the reality in front of him and not finding the adjustment easy. Cole Mercer was as advertised tall. He had dark hair a little long at the collar and a jaw that looked like it had been set into place by someone who meant business. He was wearing a brown canvas work coat, and his hat was pushed back on his head the way working men wore theirs when they weren't trying to make an impression. He was objectively the kind of man that women wrote home about. And he was looking at Eleanor Vane with an expression that he was working very hard to make neutral. He was not entirely succeeding. Eleanor crossed the distance between them at a steady, deliberate pace. She stopped 2 feet from him, shifted her carpet bag to her left hand, and extended her right. "Mr. Mercer," she said, "I'm Eleanor Vane. I believe you've been expecting me." He shook her hand. His grip was firm, reflexive, the grip of a man who shook hands the same way every time, regardless of circumstance. "Miss Vane?" he said. "Yes. Welcome to Black Hollow. Thank you." She looked at him steadily. "You can say it if you need to." He blinked. "Say what?" Whatever it is that's sitting behind your eyes right now. Her voice was even, conversational. I've been on that coach for 2 days. I'm tired and I'd rather have the truth standing up than find it lying down. Something moved across his face. It was not quite shame and not quite respect. It was somewhere in between the expression of a man who had not anticipated being read so accurately by someone he had known for 30 seconds. He cleared his throat. I wasn't going to say anything inappropriate, Miss Vane. No, she agreed. You were going to think it politely instead. That's fine, Mr. Mercer. Most people do. She picked up her carpetbag again. Now, is there somewhere I can wash before I see the kitchen, or would you prefer to take me straight to the ranch? There was a beat of silence. From across the street, she heard someone say something low, and then there was a short, poorly suppressed laugh from the direction of the feed store. Eleanor did not turn her head. Cole Mercer did a sharp, flat look in the direction of the sound, and the laugh stopped. I'll take you straight out, he said. We can stop at the Mercantile first if you need anything for the road. I have what I need. She nodded toward the wagon parked at the side of the depot. Is that yours? It is. Then let's go. She walked toward it. He followed, and she heard his boots on the frozen ground behind her, and she heard him exhale once quietly, and she thought, well, that is how it is going to be. And she held her head level and kept walking. The road out to the Mercer Ranch was 11 miles of cold, hard-packed ground that wound up through scrub and rock and the occasional stand of bare-armed cottonwoods. Cole Mercer was not a man who filled silence out of obligation. Eleanor respected that. She had met too many men who talked to avoid thinking, and she was not in the mood for that particular performance. She watched the land instead, the wide, flat gray of the sky pressing down on the ochre and rust of the high country. The frozen creek beds, the way the light in late November, had that thin, exhausted quality, like it was trying its best, but didn't have much left. After about 4 miles, Cole said, The hands are named Red Hatch and Eric. Red's been with me 8 years. The other 2, 3, and 2 years respectively. They're good workers. They don't know much about the domestic side of things. That's not their job, Eleanor said. No, but with Mrs. Grady gone, she was the cook. Things have gotten a little loose around the house. Loose how? He paused, which told her more than the words that followed. The pantry needs work. The kitchen range needs a proper cleaning. There's a system that Mrs. Grady had that nobody quite understands anymore. Is there an account book? He glanced at her sideways. For the kitchen. For the household. Pantry inventory, supply orders, meal planning for the hands, costs per week. Is there a record? There was. Can't say where it is currently. I'll find it. She settled her hands in her lap. What's the budget for the harvest supper? Another pause. Longer this time. I was thinking we'd figure that out once you'd had a chance to settle in. Mr. Mercer, Eleanor said without heat. The supper is in 3 weeks. Figuring out the budget is the first thing that needs to happen, not the last. How many families are you expecting? He seemed for a moment caught between irritation and something more complicated. Somewhere between 12 and 18 families. Hard to say exactly. Call it 20 to be safe. Do you have a smokehouse? Yes. Root cellar? Yes. How much of your pantry is already stocked versus what needs to be purchased? He was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice had a different quality. Not warmer exactly, but more engaged, like a man who had just realized the conversation he was in was not the one he had been prepared for. I couldn't tell you off the top of my head. You'd have to look at it. I will. She turned to look at the road ahead. Don't worry, Mr. Mercer, I know what I'm doing. He didn't answer, but she noticed he sat up a little straighter on the bench and he didn't look at her sideways again. The ranch itself appeared at the end of a long straight drive lined with fence posts, and Eleanor looked at it the way she always looked at a new place, not with sentiment, but with assessment. The main house was a solid 2-story structure, good bones, good size, but clearly in need of a woman's management. The porch boards needed sweeping. One of the shutters on the ground floor was hanging at a wrong angle. Firewood was stacked without order near the south wall. None of it was disastrous. All of it was fixable. Red met them in the yard. He was a compact, weathered man in his mid-40s, with exactly the kind of red hair that explained the name going gray now at the temples. He pulled off his hat when Eleanor stepped down from the wagon. "This is Miss Vane," Cole said. Red nodded. "Ma'am, welcome." "Thank you, Red." Eleanor looked around the yard with her calm, steady survey. "Where are the others?" Red glanced at Cole, then back at Eleanor, recalibrating with slightly more grace than his employer had managed. "Hatch is out on the south fence. Eric's in the barn." "I'll meet them at supper," Eleanor said. "For now, Mr. Mercer, would you show me the kitchen?" The kitchen was, in fact, a problem. Not an emergency, nothing was actively on fire or rotting, but a problem in the way that neglect always becomes a problem gradually and then everywhere at once. The range had not been properly cleaned in at least 3 weeks. The pantry shelves were half-organized with dry goods mixed in among canning jars and tools that had no business being in a kitchen at all. There was a crock of something that had been set to soak and apparently forgotten. The account book, when Eleanor found it 20 minutes later in a drawer beneath a pile of old newspapers, had not been updated since October 14th. She stood in the middle of the kitchen and was quiet for a moment. Cole Mercer stood in the doorway. She could feel him watching, trying to read her reaction, perhaps bracing for dismay or complaint, or the worst fear of a practical man drama. She set the account book on the table, smoothed her hand over the cover, and said, "All right. I'll need hot water and clean rags to start on the range. Is there a supply of lye soap?" "Should be under the sink." "Good." She took off her coat, folded it over the back of a chair, and rolled her sleeves to the elbow. "I'll have supper on the table by 7. Nothing fancy tonight. I need to see what's actually here before I plan anything. But the men will eat." Cole Mercer stood in the doorway for another moment. Then he said in a voice that had lost some of its careful management, "Miss Vane, I want to—" "You don't need to say anything, Mr. Mercer. I think I do." He cleared his throat. "The way I looked at you back in town. That wasn't—" He stopped, started again. "That wasn't what you deserved. After coming all this way." Eleanor looked at him across the kitchen. Her expression did not change, but something in her went very still, and then very quietly let out a breath it had been holding since the stagecoach stopped. "No," she said at last. "It wasn't. But it was honest, and I'd rather have honest than polite." She held his gaze for a moment. "We're square, Mr. Mercer. Now let me get to work." He nodded once and left. She turned to the range. She found the lye soap under the sink, exactly where he said. She filled a pot with water and set it to heat on the part of the range that was still functioning adequately. She found clean rags in a basket near the back door. She started at the top and worked her way down methodical and unhurried, the way her mother had taught her when she was 7 years old in a farmhouse in Pennsylvania, cleaning a range that was older and grimier than this one with less soap and colder water. She worked with the quiet, focused efficiency of a woman who had spent her entire life making order out of disorder and who had stopped apologizing for how well she did it somewhere around the age of 25. By 6 o'clock, the range was clean. By 6:30, the pantry had been sorted into a preliminary organization: staples on the left, preserves on the right, tools removed entirely and placed on the back porch. By 10 minutes to 7, a pot of salt pork and white beans was on the range with cornbread in the Dutch oven, and a pot of strong black coffee on the side. Hatch and Eric came in from their work and stopped in the kitchen doorway the way men stop when they encounter something they weren't expecting. Hatch was young, maybe 22, with a wide-open face and the slightly dazed expression of someone who had been living on his own, cooking for too long. Eric was older, quieter, dark-eyed, and watchful. Hatch said, "It smells different in here." Eleanor set the cornbread pan on the table. "Sit down." They sat. Red came in from the yard. Cole came in from wherever he had spent the last 2 hours. She did not ask. They all sat, and Eleanor set the food on the table and poured the coffee, and for a moment there was no sound but the settling of the house against the wind outside, and the small civilized sounds of men eating a real meal. Red was the first one to speak. He set down his spoon and looked at Eleanor across the table with an expression of such uncomplicated relief that she almost smiled. "Ma'am," he said, "that is the best thing I have eaten in 6 weeks." "Thank you, Red," Hatch said with his mouth still slightly full. "Mrs. Grady used to make beans more watery." "Hatch," Cole said. "I meant it as a compliment," Hatch said, genuinely bewildered. Eric said nothing, but he refilled his bowl without being invited, which was its own kind of compliment. Cole Mercer looked at Eleanor across the table. She was eating her own meal with the same calm economy she brought to everything, not performing modesty, not fishing for praise, simply eating the same food she had made for the rest of them. "The account book needs updating," he said. "I know, I'll start it tomorrow morning." "The pantry needs 3 items from the mercantile before I can do a proper week's planning. I'll write you a list tonight." He nodded slowly. Across the table, Red was watching this exchange with the expression of a man witnessing something that he was choosing to file away carefully for later consideration. "The harvest supper," Cole said. "I know you said the budget is the first order of business." "It is." "I can sit down with you after breakfast tomorrow and go through the numbers." "Good." Eleanor set down her spoon. "I'll also need to know which families are confirmed and which are still uncertain, and whether anyone in the community has committed to bringing dishes. If this is going to be done right, it can't be done alone." Cole looked at her steadily. "You've done this kind of thing before." It was not quite a question. Eleanor met his eyes. "I've been managing households since I was 14, Mr. Mercer," she said quietly. "I know how to feed a room full of people in a hard season. That's not a small thing, and it's not a simple thing, but it is something I know how to do." The silence that followed was different from the silences that had come before. It was not the silence of a man managing his expression or choosing his words carefully. It was the silence of a man who was genuinely recalibrating not his disappointment this time, but his estimate. Hatch broke it inevitably by asking if there was any more cornbread. "There is," Eleanor said. "Pass your plate." She served him without ceremony, and the table returned to the small, ordinary sounds of a household feeding itself. And outside, the Colorado night pressed cold and clear against the windows, and the Mercer Ranch, for the first time in 6 weeks, smelled like a home. Later, when the dishes were done, and the men had gone to the bunkhouse, and Cole had gone to his study to look at ledgers, Eleanor stood alone in the clean kitchen and allowed herself exactly 1 moment of stillness. She pressed both hands flat on the surface of the work table. She breathed in. She breathed out. She thought about the look on Cole Mercer's face at the stage depot. She thought about the laughter from across the street and the women on the boardwalk and the boy on the barrel who had watched with his uncomplicated eyes. Then she thought about the clean range, the ordered pantry, the empty bowls. Red's face when he said it was the best thing he had eaten in 6 weeks. She stood up straight. She dried her hands on the dishcloth. She picked up the account book and the stub of a pencil she'd found near the bread box, sat down at the kitchen table, and began to write. She had 3 weeks before the harvest supper. She had a kitchen, a smokehouse, a root cellar, and a pantry that was already better than it had been this morning. She had a budget meeting tomorrow and a list to make tonight, and more work ahead of her than most people would choose willingly. Eleanor Vane had never been afraid of work. She had never been afraid of hard seasons or hard rooms or men who looked at her the way Cole Mercer had looked at her on that frozen street in Black Hollow. She was afraid sometimes of hope. That was the thing she kept careful watch over, the thing she rationed like good flour in a long winter. But sitting in that kitchen in the quiet, with the clean smell of lye soap and coffee and a meal well made, she thought that maybe, just maybe, she could afford to let a little of it in. Just a little. Just enough to last until morning. The account book was nearly full by the time Eleanor set down her pencil that first night, and what she found in those pages told her more about Cole Mercer than anything he had said to her on the ride out from town. He was not careless with money. He was not reckless or lazy or indifferent to order. What he was plainly and simply was overwhelmed, the kind of overwhelmed that comes on a man slowly after too many things go wrong in too short a time, and he keeps working because working is the only thing he knows how to do about it. The accounts showed a ranch that had been functioning well 18 months ago and had been sliding quietly sideways ever since. Mrs. Grady's departure had been the last straw, not the first. Eleanor closed the account book, set it square on the corner of the table, and went to bed. She was up before 5 the next morning. She had the range-fired coffee on and biscuits in the Dutch oven by the time Red appeared in the kitchen doorway at 5:30, with the expression of a man who has been caught expecting disappointment and received breakfast instead. "Morning, ma'am." "Good morning, Red. Sit down. Coffee's ready." He sat. He wrapped both hands around the mug she set in front of him and was quiet for a moment, in the way that people are quiet when something simple has turned out to be unexpectedly good. "How long has the kitchen been running short?" Eleanor asked, not looking up from the biscuits. Red considered this with the seriousness it deserved. "Since October, bad. Before that it was manageable. Mrs. Grady gave 2 weeks' notice and then left in 3 days. Something about her sister in Denver. And before Mrs. Grady, there was a woman named Patton who stayed 4 months. Before that, Cole's mother ran the house." He paused. "She passed 2 years ago." Eleanor was quiet for a moment. She set the biscuits on the table and sat down across from him. "He's been running the ranch and the house since then." "Best he could." Red looked at his coffee. "Cole's not a man who asks for help easy." "I noticed. He's also not a man who says one thing and means another. What you see is what he is." Eleanor looked at him steadily. "Are you telling me something, Red?" The old ranch hand met her eyes, and something in his weathered face was careful and direct at the same time. "I'm telling you, he's worth the patience it's going to take to get to know him. That's all." Before Eleanor could answer, boots hit the porch boards and Hatch came through the back door with Eric a step behind him, and the kitchen filled up with the ordinary noise of men arriving for breakfast, and the moment passed. But she thought about what Red had said for the rest of the morning. Cole came in for the budget meeting at 8 o'clock sharp. He sat across from her at the kitchen table with the ranch ledger under one arm and a look on his face that said he had been thinking about this since yesterday and had organized his thoughts accordingly. Eleanor had the account book open and her list of pantry needs already written in a clean column on a separate sheet of paper. They worked for 2 hours. It was not a comfortable 2 hours. It was the kind of work that requires 2 people to be honest with each other about numbers and shortfalls and what is actually possible versus what sounds good, and that kind of honesty is never entirely comfortable. But it was productive. Eleanor found 2 places where money was being spent on supply orders that could be consolidated. Cole identified a family 3 miles out who had agreed to contribute a quarter of a smoked hog for the supper and had not been recorded anywhere. By 10 o'clock, they had a working budget, a supply list, and a timeline. Cole sat back in his chair and looked at the papers spread between them. "You do this fast," he said. "I do it the way it needs to be done." Eleanor began stacking the papers into order. "The sooner you have a clear picture, the sooner you can make real decisions. Guessing costs more than knowing." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Where did you learn accounting?" "My father's farm. Then a general store in Harrisburg, where I kept the books for 4 years. Then a boarding house in St. Louis." She said it without drama, just the plain sequence of a life lived practically. "I've been keeping someone's account since I was 16, Mr. Mercer." He looked at her across the table. "Cole," he said. She glanced up. "Pardon, Cole." He held her gaze. "If we're going to sit at this table every week and argue about supply budgets, you might as well call me Cole." Eleanor considered this for a moment. It was a small thing, the offer of a first name, but small things had weight when they were genuine, and this one was. She could tell by the way he said it, not smooth, not practiced, just straightforward and a little uncomfortable, which meant he meant it. "All right," she said. "Cole." He nodded once, gathered his ledger, and left for the south pasture. Eleanor watched the door close behind him, and then she looked back at the neat column of figures on her paper, and she thought, well, that is a thing that happened. Then she put on her coat and went to find Red because the smokehouse needed an inventory, and the harvest supper was not going to plan itself. The next 10 days moved fast. Eleanor did not have the luxury of easing in gently, and she did not try to. She was up before the ranch hands every morning, and she was still at the kitchen table when they went to bed at night, working through the supper list, or updating the account book, or writing to Mrs. Calloway in town, who was organizing the contributed dishes from the neighboring families. The work itself she knew how to do. What surprised her genuinely surprised her in the way that things surprise you when you have been braced for the worst was the ranch hands. Hatch was willing to the point of sometimes being an obstacle. He appeared in the kitchen one afternoon while Eleanor was working through a preservation batch and offered to help with such uncomplicated eagerness that she put him to work stirring the pot and talked him through the timing. And by the end of the afternoon, he had understood the basic principles of canning without being aware that he had been taught anything. Eric was different. Quieter, more internal. The kind of man who watched more than he spoke. But he showed up the morning Eleanor was trying to move 2 heavy barrels of flour from the back storage room, and he picked up one without being asked, set it in the position she indicated, and went back to work without a word, and she thought that one pays attention. Red was steady, dry-humored, and quietly making sure the other 2 behaved themselves in Eleanor's presence with a subtlety that she appreciated and chose not to acknowledge out loud. And Cole. Cole Mercer was the variable she had not yet figured out, and she was smart enough to know it. He was not a warm man by nature. He was not cold either. It was more that he ran a careful economy of self-expression, and you only got what he chose to give, and he chose carefully. But she noticed things. She noticed that he refilled her coffee in the mornings sometimes, without being asked and without commenting on it. She noticed that when she brought up the supply shortfall in the pantry on day 4, and said she needed to make a trip to town, he arranged to take her himself rather than send her with one of the hands, and he did not explain why. She noticed that on the 7th day when she had been on her feet since 4:30 and had managed a full supper preparation, plus 2 hours of account work and a meeting with Mrs. Calloway that had run long. He came into the kitchen at 9 in the evening and found her still at the table and said quietly without preamble, "You need to sleep." "I need to finish this column," she said without looking up. "It'll be there tomorrow. So will the supper, which is in 2 weeks, which means the timeline does not have a lot of give in it." "Eleanor." His voice was different when he said her name. She had noticed that too. Lower, more deliberate. "The column will be there tomorrow." She looked up at him then. He was standing in the kitchen doorway, still in his work clothes, and he looked tired, and what she saw in his face was not impatience or irritation. It was something that it took her a moment to identify, because it was something she was not accustomed to being on the receiving end of. It was concern. "All right," she said. She closed the account book. "Good night, Cole." "Good night, Eleanor." She lay awake for a while after that, listening to the wind off the mountains, thinking about the look on his face. She told herself it was the practical concern of an employer for a useful employee. She was fairly certain she was right. She was less certain than she would have liked. The trip to town on day 9 was when things shifted. Cole pulled the wagon up in front of the mercantile, and they went in together to fill the supply list. Harlan Teague, who ran the mercantile, was a man of about 55, with the kind of public friendliness that carries a private edge, and he looked at Eleanor the moment she came through the door, the way he had probably been waiting to since the day she arrived. "Miss Vane," he said pleasantly. "Settling in all right out at the Mercer place." "Very well, thank you." She handed him the supply list. "We'll need all of this. Do you have the grade 2 cornmeal or only grade 1? He glanced at the list. "Got both. Though I'll tell you, most women coming new to Colorado don't take to it long. Winters up here are hard." He smiled at her, smooth and sociable. "You might find yourself wanting to go back to wherever it is you came from." The mercantile was not empty. There were 2 other customers in the store, a woman Eleanor recognized from the town meeting Red had told her about, and a young man loading a crate near the back. They were both listening. Eleanor looked at Harlan Teague without any change of expression. "I'll need 12 pounds of the grade 2, she said, "and 8 pounds of the dried beans if you have them. Navy beans if possible." Teague's smile tightened at the edges. "I'm just saying it's a long way from easy ranch life. A woman needs to be—" He paused, and his eyes moved over her briefly, and the pause said everything the words did not suited to it. Cole said from 2 feet behind her in a voice that was completely level and absolutely final. "She'll have 12 pounds of grade 2 cornmeal, 8 pounds of navy beans, the salt pork on the 3rd shelf, and a 20-pound sack of the white flour. Ring it up, Harlan." Teague blinked. Something in his expression recalibrated rapidly. "Of course," he said. "Of course, Cole." Cole did not say anything else. He did not move to Eleanor's side or make any gesture that could be read as theatrical. He simply stood where he was and looked at Teague with the flat, patient certainty of a man who has said what needed to be said and does not feel the need to say it twice. The woman near the back of the store was watching Eleanor now. Not the way the town had watched her off the stage. This was different. This was the careful, measuring look of a woman who is seeing something she is still deciding what to make of. Eleanor met her eyes briefly steadily, and then looked back at the counter and checked the list. In the wagon on the way home, she said, "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did," Cole said. "I can handle Harlan Teague. I know you can. That wasn't the point." He kept his eyes on the road. "You're on my ranch. You're doing a job that's making my life considerably more functional than it was 3 weeks ago. Teague doesn't get to talk to you that way." Eleanor was quiet for a moment. The wagon moved over a rough patch of frozen road, and she steadied herself against the bench. "Thank you," she said. He nodded once. "Don't thank me for basic decency." She thought about that the rest of the ride home. She thought about the way he had said it, not as a grand gesture, not as a performance of protection, but as a simple statement of what was right. Like it was the only possible response. Like it hadn't even required a decision. She thought about what Red had said. He's worth the patience it's going to take to get to know him. She was starting to understand what Red had meant. The following week, Mrs. Calloway came out to the ranch for a planning meeting and brought with her the news that 3 more families had confirmed for the harvest supper, bringing the expected count to somewhere between 22 and 25 families. Eleanor absorbed this without visible alarm and immediately began adjusting the quantities in her head. "That's a significant number," Mrs. Calloway said, slightly anxiously. She was a brisk, sensible woman in her 40s who had initially looked at Eleanor with the same careful skepticism as everyone else, and was now, Eleanor noticed, consulting her like a general, consulting a field officer. "It's manageable," Eleanor said. "We have enough in the smokehouse for the main course if we supplement with 2 more hams. I'll have Cole send to the Hartley farm. Red told me they had a surplus. The contribution list covers most of the sides. What I need from you is the confirmed bread bakers and whether the Henderson family is still bringing the apple preserves." "They are. Martha Henderson has 6 jars set aside." "Good. Then we need 4 more volunteers for bread, and someone has to manage the children's table. Is there a woman in town who's good with children and has time?" Mrs. Calloway blinked, then smiled for the first time with something that was not polite and not managed but genuinely warm. "You know Miss Vane," she said. "I believe you might actually pull this off." "I intend to," Eleanor said. "Now, about the bread volunteers." From the doorway, Cole watched her work. He had come in for water and stayed longer than he needed to, leaning against the doorframe with his hat in his hands, watching Eleanor Vane run the most complicated logistics he had ever seen organized at a kitchen table. And he thought about the woman who had stepped off the stage 11 days ago, the one he had looked at and failed in that first moment to see clearly. He was seeing clearly now. He put his hat back on and went back to work. But the image stayed with him, Eleanor at the table, calm and certain, the account book open the list, complete the problem already halfway solved before most people would have finished stating it. He thought about what it would mean when the supper was over and the immediate need was gone. He thought about the arrangement they had made practical, specific a household position with clear responsibilities and a clear duration. He thought about whether he was the kind of man who could afford to want something different than what he had arranged for. He did not have an answer to that yet. But for the first time in a long time, he found himself thinking about it. The morning of the harvest supper, Eleanor woke at 3:30 and lay still for exactly 30 seconds, running the day's sequence through her mind like a general reviewing a battle plan before dawn. Then she got up. She had done everything she could do in advance. The smokehouse had been worked for 2 days straight. The bread was staged. The contribution list was confirmed. She had spoken to every volunteer personally assigned, every task anticipated, every shortfall she could foresee. Mrs. Calloway had called it the most organized community supper Black Hollow had ever attempted, and Eleanor had thanked her and then quietly made 2 backup plans for the things she thought were most likely to go wrong. What she had not planned for was the sky. She noticed it when she stepped onto the back porch at 4 in the morning to check the smokehouse temperature. The air had a weight to it that was different from ordinary November cold. It pressed down from the north with the particular heaviness that people who have lived in high country long enough learn to read like a second language. Red was already in the yard. He was standing very still, looking north, and when he heard Eleanor on the porch, he turned and looked at her and said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "That's a storm." "How long?" He considered the sky the way old working men consider things, without drama, with the full weight of experience. 6 hours, maybe 8. It won't hold off past mid-afternoon. Eleanor stood on the porch in the freezing dark and thought. The supper was scheduled to begin at 5 in the evening. Families were already traveling, some of them from 8 and 10 miles out. If the storm hit at mid-afternoon, those families would be caught on the open road. If it hit at evening, they would be caught in it trying to get home in the dark with children. She went back inside and woke Cole. She knocked on his bedroom door twice, heard him stir, and when he opened it, he was already half-dressed, reading her face before she said a word. "Storm," he said. "Red thinks mid-afternoon. I think we move the supper start to noon and plan for everyone to shelter here through the night if it gets bad." She said it quickly, cleanly, no preamble. "We have enough food. The bunkhouse can sleep 8 more adults if we clear the center aisle. The main house parlor can take 4 families with children. We'll need to send word to every confirmed family before 7 in the morning." Cole looked at her for a moment. "That's 23 families. 24 counting the Hartleys. Eric knows where all of them are. He can ride. Hatch can take the north road. You and I will handle the town families directly." She held his gaze. "We need to decide now, Cole. Every hour we wait is an hour someone's already on the road." He made the decision the way she had come to understand he made decisions, without theater, without delay. "Get Eric up," he said. "I'll talk to Hatch. Meet me in the kitchen in 10 minutes. 11 minutes later, they were all at the kitchen table and Eleanor was speaking, and the men were listening with the focused attention of people who understood they were in the presence of a plan that would work if everyone did their part exactly right. "Eric, you take the north and west families. Start with the Harmons because they have the furthest to travel. Hatch, you ride south to the Hendersons and the Parkers and loop back through the Tully homestead. Tell everyone supper moves to noon, shelter available if the weather turns, bring what they plan to bring, and anything extra they can spare for a possible overnight." She looked at Cole. "You and I go to town and speak to Calloway Teague's wife, the Brennan family, and Reverend Marsh. He can pass word to anyone we miss at the morning service." "Marsh's service starts at 8, Cole said. "We'll be there before it ends." Red said quietly, "What do you need me to do?" Eleanor looked at him. "Stay here and get this house ready. Move the parlor furniture to the walls. Pull every extra blanket and quilt from the upstairs cedar chest and stack them in the parlor. Make sure the wood box in every room in this house is full. Can you do that?" "Yes, ma'am," Red said. And there was nothing in his voice but steady, simple certainty. And Eleanor felt in that moment something that she rarely allowed herself, the clean, solid feeling of being exactly where she was supposed to be, doing exactly what she was built to do. "Then let's go," she said. They moved. Eleanor and Cole reached town by 7:15. The sky to the north had taken on the low, silver-gray quality that precedes heavy snow, and people on the street who looked up at it were doing so with the particular stillness of recognition. Mrs. Calloway met them at her front door, before Eleanor finished knocking, took one look at Cole's face and then Eleanor's and said, "The storm. We're moving the supper to noon," Eleanor said. "Shelter at the ranch for anyone who needs it overnight. We need you to reach everyone on the town side of the list." Mrs. Calloway did not hesitate, did not ask unnecessary questions, did not spend time being surprised. She took the list, Eleanor held out, scanned it in about 4 seconds and said, "I'll have Martha Brennan take the east side, and I'll take the west. We can cover everyone on this list by 9 o'clock. Thank you." Eleanor was already turning. Cole caught her elbow briefly, not to stop her, just a steadying gesture there, and gone in a moment. But she registered it, the way she registered everything he did, with the careful private attention she had been giving his small gestures for 2 weeks now. They reached the church just before the service ended. Cole slipped in through the side door and made his way to Reverend Marsh at the front, and Eleanor stood near the back and watched him speak quietly to the Reverend, who nodded and then stepped back, while Marsh addressed the congregation with the news. The response in the room was immediate, not panic, but the organized concern of a community that has faced hard weather before and knows the difference between preparation and emergency. A woman 3 rows from the back turned and found Eleanor's eyes across the room. She was the same woman Eleanor had seen in the mercantile 9 days ago, the one who had watched her with that careful measuring look. Her name, Eleanor had since learned, was Clara Webb, and she was 38 years old and had farmed alone since her husband passed and was by common consensus the most capable woman in Black Hollow. Clara Webb looked at Eleanor for a long moment. Then she stood up, came to the back of the church and said in a low voice, "Tell me what you need." Eleanor told her. By 11:30, the Mercer Ranch had transformed. Wagons were coming up the drive at intervals of 10 and 15 minutes, families unloading food and children, and the various cargo of people who are moving their evening into an afternoon, and their supper into a potential overnight shelter. Red had the parlor cleared and the wood boxes filled. Hatch had returned from the South Road and was directing wagons in the yard with an efficiency that surprised Eleanor, until she remembered that this was a boy who applied himself with enormous energy to whatever task was in front of him. The kitchen was operating at a level of organized intensity that Eleanor had not experienced since her time managing the boarding house in St. Louis, where she had once fed 43 people on a Tuesday with 20 minutes of notice and a pantry that was supposed to last until Friday. She had the smoked meat, warming the contributed dishes organized by type and temperature requirements, the bread warming in rotation through the oven, and 3 women from town working at her direction with the smooth interlocking efficiency of people who are following a clear plan executed by someone who knows what they are doing. Mrs. Calloway was one of them. Clara Webb was another. The third was a young woman named Dora Finch, who had arrived with 6 jars of pickled vegetables and a deep personal competence that Eleanor had recognized on sight and immediately deployed. "Dora," Eleanor said at 12:15. "The children's table needs someone who can keep 20 small people seated and fed without losing one. Is that you?" Dora Finch looked at her steadily. "That is absolutely me," she said and went. Cole found Eleanor in the kitchen at 12:20, about 10 minutes before the general serving was supposed to begin. He had been outside managing arrivals and had come in for a moment, and he stopped in the doorway of the kitchen and looked at it at the organized, purposeful motion of 4 women running a complex operation with no wasted movement and no visible stress. And his expression did something that Eleanor, who was not looking at him but was aware of him the way she had become aware of him in any room they shared, registered without turning her head. He crossed to her. "Anything you need from me." "The Hartley family brought 2 extra hams that need to go into the warming oven," she said. "They're on the back porch, and someone needs to organize the men to set up the trestle tables in the main hall in the next 15 minutes. "Done." He was already turning to go, and then he stopped, and he turned back, and he said quietly enough that only she could hear, "Eleanor." She looked up from the bread rotation. "This is..." He stopped, started again. I don't know that I've ever seen anything like this. She looked at him steadily. Like what? He made a small gesture that took in the kitchen, the women working, the sound of families settling into the parlor, and the main hall, the smell of a real meal being made for a lot of people who needed one. This, he said, what you've done. Eleanor held his gaze for a moment. Then she said, the table's coal. 15 minutes. He almost smiled. She was nearly certain of it. He went. The storm hit at 2:15. Eleanor heard it before she felt it, a change in the sound of the wind outside, a deepening, a shift from the background noise of ordinary November to something with intention in it. Inside the main hall, conversation paused for a beat, then resumed at a lower register. Children who had been running between the tables went to their parents without being told to. And then, the snow came. It came hard and fast, the way Colorado mountain storms sometimes come, not as a gradual building, but as a sudden arrival, a wall of white and wind that hit the house and made the walls vibrate. Through the windows, the yard disappeared in under 30 seconds. The temperature outside dropped 10 degrees in as many minutes. Inside the Mercer Ranch, 114 people Eleanor had counted, because she counted everything were warm, fed, and sheltered. For a moment, standing at the edge of the main hall with a dish towel over her shoulder, Eleanor let herself hear it. The voices, the children, the sound of plates and forks, and the particular resonance of a large group of people who are warm and have food, and are for this moment safe. She had built this. Not alone. She would not have thought of it that way. But she had been the one to see the problem. Before dawn, build the plan. In the dark, set every moving part into motion with the hours she had left. This was the result. Harlan Teague was sitting at a table in the main hall. He had come with his wife, who was a small, quiet woman who had touched Eleanor's arm in gratitude when she arrived and had not said much since. Teague himself had not spoken to Eleanor since he came in. He had looked at the hall, at what it was holding, at the precision of the organization, and something in his face had gone through a series of changes that Eleanor, who had been watching without appearing to watch, had catalogued carefully. He caught her eye across the hall. She looked back at him even, and steady, the way she had learned to look at people who had decided what she was before she had the chance to show them. He looked away first. Clara Webb appeared at her elbow. She had been managing the children's area with Dora Finch for the past 2 hours, and had the look of a woman who had been working hard and was satisfied about it. Teague looks like he swallowed something disagreeable, Clara said low. He'll recover, Eleanor said. Clara looked at her sideways. You knew, didn't you? This morning when you came to the church, you already knew exactly what was going to happen today. I knew what might happen, Eleanor said. Planning and knowing aren't the same thing. Don't do that, Clara said without heat. Don't make it smaller than it is. You planned for a storm that hadn't hit yet. You moved 100-some people into a safe building and fed them a real meal before the roads closed. That is not a small thing. Eleanor was quiet for a moment. It's what needed doing. I know. Clara looked at her with the direct, frank appreciation of a woman who does not give compliments lightly. I just want you to know that the people in this room know it too, even if some of them take longer to say so than others. The storm raged outside for 3 hours before it settled into a sustained heavy snowfall that made the roads impassable until morning. Families stayed. The Mercer Ranch held them in the parlor in the main hall, in the bunkhouse, where Red had organized the men without a fuss, and with a surprising degree of efficiency. Children slept in improvised arrangements on quilts in the parlor corners. Older couples took the chairs near the main hall fireplace. 3 families shared the 2 upstairs guest rooms, with a cheerful practicality that frontier living made ordinary. Eleanor moved through all of it. She checked on the food supply, twice confirmed with Red about the wood boxes at 8, organized the breakfast planning for morning before most people had gone to sleep, and made sure every family with young children had what they needed before she thought about stopping. It was past 10 o'clock when Cole found her in the kitchen going through the remaining supply stock by lantern light, recalculating the morning's quantities. Sit down, he said. I'm almost done. You said that 2 hours ago. Red told me. He crossed the kitchen, pulled out the chair across from her, and sat down himself. Not leaving. Waiting. Eleanor looked at him across the lantern light. His face had the particular exhaustion of a man working since before sunrise and is not going to admit it. She thought with a sudden, unexpected clarity that she knew this man. Not completely, there were rooms in Cole Mercer she had not been given access to yet, but enough. She knew he refilled her coffee without commenting on it. She knew he had driven her to town himself, rather than send a hand. She knew the way he had said her name in the mercantile doorway flat and final when Teague had looked at her with that particular slide of his eyes. She knew he was sitting across from her at 10 o'clock at night in a kitchen full of sleeping strangers, and he was not going anywhere until she stopped working. She closed the supply book. "All right," she said. "Good." He didn't move. "Eleanor, what you did today." People helped. Mrs. Calloway, Clara, Dora Finch, your hands, everyone helped. They helped because you showed them where to stand. His voice was quiet and very direct. "I want you to understand that I know that. I know what today was, and I know what it took, and I know—" He stopped. His jaw worked for a moment in the way she had learned meant he was choosing his words with particular care. "I know I looked at you wrong the day you came off that stage." The lantern between them was still. Outside, the snow came down in the deep, unhurried way of a storm that has already done its damage and is now simply settling in. "You've said that before," she said. "I'm saying it again. Because today, I watched you save about 30 families from being stranded on a mountain road in a November storm. And I want you to know that I am not a man who misses a thing twice." He met her eyes. "I won't miss it again. Whatever it is that's in front of me, I won't miss it again." Eleanor looked at him for a long moment. The kitchen was warm. Through the walls came the muffled sounds of 114 people sleeping alive and safe because she had woken up at 4 in the morning and made a plan in the dark. "Get some sleep, Cole," she said softly. He stood. He started for the door. Then he stopped with his back to her and said, "You belong here, Eleanor. I want you to know that." He went. She sat in the kitchen with the lantern and the supply book and the sound of the storm outside, and she pressed both hands flat on the table, and she breathed, and she allowed herself not hope, not yet, not entirely, but something close to it. Something that felt for the first time in a very long time, like it might actually be safe to keep. The families left the next morning in stages as the snow settled, and the roads became passable enough for careful travel. Eleanor stood on the porch and watched them go, wagons loaded back up, children, bundled hands raised in farewell. And she felt the particular exhaustion that comes not from physical work, but from sustained, concentrated responsibility finally releasing its hold. Clara Webb was the last to leave. She came to find Eleanor in the kitchen, where Eleanor was already starting on the cleanup with the focused, methodical energy that was simply how she functioned, and Clara stood in the doorway for a moment watching her before she spoke. "I'm going to say something, and I need you to just hear it," Clara said. Eleanor looked up from the stack of dishes. "All right. This town has needed someone like you for longer than anyone here is going to admit out loud." Clara's voice was direct and undecorated, the voice of a woman who had spent too many years alone to bother with softening things that didn't need softening. "What you did yesterday was not a small thing. I know you keep saying it was. But the people in this county are going to be telling that story for 20 years, and your name is going to be in the middle of it." Eleanor set down the dish she was holding. She looked at Clara Webb across the kitchen and felt something move in her chest. Not the guarded provisional thing she had been carrying since the stagecoach, but something older and more honest. The feeling of being seen by someone who did not need anything from the seeing. "Thank you, Clara," she said. Simply, without qualification. Clara nodded once, the nod of a woman who considers a thing settled when it is settled. "I'll be back Thursday for the cooperative stores meeting. Don't let them start without you. Half those men will try to talk the budget sideways if there's no one there who can do arithmetic." She picked up her coat. "And Eleanor, get some sleep." She left. The kitchen went quiet. Outside, the last wagon moved down the drive, and the Mercer Ranch returned to its ordinary dimensions: 4 men, 1 woman, and the particular silence of a place that has held something large, and now holds only itself. Red found Eleanor at noon still working through the cleanup, and told her with the gentle but absolute authority of a man who has decided he is done watching someone run themselves into the ground, that he and Hatch would finish the main haul, and she was to go sit somewhere that was not a kitchen. Eleanor looked at him. He looked back. She went and sat by the parlor fire for 45 minutes, which was the longest she had been still in 4 days. And she thought about what Cole had said the night before. "You belong here, Eleanor. I want you to know that." She had been thinking about it since he said it. She had been, if she was honest with herself, and she had made herself a promise a long time ago to always be honest with herself, because the alternative was a particular kind of slow damage that she had watched happen to other women and refused to let happen to her. She had been thinking about it the way you think about a thing you are afraid to want too directly. Not the words themselves, but the way he had said them. Standing with his back to her, not performing the sentiment, not making it dramatic. Just saying a true thing in the dark and then going. She had known men who said grand things and meant small ones. Cole Mercer said small things and meant them completely. She understood in the firelight of the parlor that this distinction mattered to her more than she had words for. She went back to work. The week after the supper changed something in Black Hollow that Eleanor noticed in increments. The change was not dramatic, it did not announce itself, but it was real, and it moved through the community the way significant things do, quietly, and at the level of ordinary interaction, one conversation at a time. Mrs. Calloway stopped her on the street Thursday morning before the cooperative stores meeting and introduced her to 3 women Eleanor had not yet met, and the introductions carried the particular tone of a woman presenting someone she is proud to know. Reverend Marsh nodded to her from across the churchyard with an expression of uncomplicated respect. Dora Finch appeared at the mercantile at the same time Eleanor did, and said without preamble that she had been thinking about the cooperative stores program and had some ideas about the inventory system, and would Eleanor be willing to hear them. Eleanor was willing. She was in fact more than willing. She and Dora stood in the street for 20 minutes while Dora laid out a system for tracking contributed goods that was genuinely better than what Eleanor had been planning, and Eleanor said so directly, and Dora looked at her with the surprised, pleased expression of someone who is not accustomed to being told plainly that they are right. And Eleanor thought, this is the kind of woman this community is full of, if anyone is paying attention. The cooperative stores meeting itself was, as Clara had predicted, an exercise in male budget management that moved sideways with some regularity. There were 7 men and 4 women around the table in the back room of the church hall, and the men were not bad men. Most of them were the same men who had sheltered at the Mercer Ranch 3 nights ago and eaten Eleanor's food with genuine gratitude, but they were men who had been making decisions in this room for a long time without much challenge, and habits die hard. The budget had been discussed for 30 minutes and had arrived approximately nowhere when Eleanor said calmly and clearly, "The problem with the current proposal is that it assumes a fixed contribution rate which doesn't account for variable harvest years. If we build a sliding scale into the charter, families who have a bad year aren't penalized, and families who have a good year contribute proportionally more. The net result over 5 years is more stable than a flat rate." There was a silence. Harlan Teague, who was at the table, looked at her with an expression that had moved considerably from the smooth, sociable condescension of the mercantile. It was not warm exactly, but it was different. It was the expression of a man who has been forced by evidence to update a position and has not yet made peace with the update. "That's not how we've done it before," he said. "I know," Eleanor said. "I'm suggesting it's worth reconsidering." Reverend Marsh said mildly. "The arithmetic would bear it out, Harlan. I've been looking at the same numbers." Another silence. And then from across the table, one of the farmers, a quiet, gray-bearded man named Abner Cross, who had not said much, said, "I'd vote for that. Sliding scale makes sense for people like me who had a rough wheat year." 4 other people around the table agreed in the next 30 seconds. The proposal moved forward. Eleanor wrote the revised language into the draft and did not look at Teague because she did not need to. Under the table, Clara Webb's foot nudged Eleanor's ankle gently. Eleanor kept her face neutral and continued writing. Cole was waiting with the wagon when the meeting finished. He had not been at the meeting. It was not his territory, but Eleanor had mentioned. It was running long, and he had come to town to handle a supply order and stayed, and she found him leaning against the wagon with his hat pulled down against the cold, talking to Red about fence line, and she felt something simple and good in the sight of him, the kind of feeling she had been keeping careful watch over since the night of the storm. "How'd it go?" he asked when she reached the wagon. "The sliding scale proposal passed," she said. Teague was resistant. Teague's always resistant. He took her basket without making anything of it and stowed it behind the bench. Did it pass or didn't it? It passed. Then that's what matters. He offered her a hand up onto the wagon bench, which he had not done before, not from impoliteness, but because Eleanor had made it evident early on that she did not require assistance boarding a wagon. She took his hand this time. She was not sure why exactly, except that it was offered plainly and without theater, and she was tired of being careful about every small thing. His hand was warm. She had not expected it to be warm in November in Colorado. She did not know why that surprised her. They rode most of the way home in the comfortable silence that had become ordinary between them, the kind that two people develop when they have been working alongside each other long enough to stop filling quiet with words. The light was going early the way it did in late November, and the snowfields on either side of the road caught the last of it and held it blue and cold. Cole said after a while, "Hatch told me you've been teaching him the preservation schedule." "He asked," Eleanor said. "He learns fast when he's interested. He's interested in anything you're willing to explain to him. Eric too, though Eric won't admit it." "Eric is learning the account system," Eleanor said. "He doesn't know that's what's happening. I've been asking him to check my columns and he's started catching errors before I point them out." Cole turned to look at her, and his expression was the one she had come to understand as his version of genuine surprise, a slight shift around the eyes, a loosening of the careful management he kept on his face. "You're training them." "I'm giving them skills that are useful." She looked at the road ahead. A ranch doesn't function on the rancher alone. If everyone around you is more capable, the whole thing runs better. That's not complicated. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "No, I reckon it's not." Another pause. "You think about things differently than most people I know." "I think about what works," she said. "Everything else is just talking." He made a sound that was not quite a laugh, but was in the same family. It was, she realized, the closest she had heard him come to one in the weeks she had been here, and it settled in her chest the way warmth does when you have been cold long enough to notice it. They were 2 miles from the ranch when Cole said, without any particular lead-in, "I had a letter from my brother in Denver." Eleanor waited. "He's been after me to sell the north pasture land for 2 years. Says the price is right and the timing's right, and I ought to take the money and simplify." Cole's voice was level, but she knew him well enough now to hear the things under the level. "He sent a buyer, man named Drummond. He's coming Thursday to look at it." "Are you going to sell?" He was quiet long enough that the question had room to sit. "No," he said finally, "but I haven't told my brother that yet. Or Drummond." Eleanor considered this. "Why not?" "Because my brother has been making decisions for me since I was 14, and I have not yet figured out how to tell him to stop without it turning into a war." He said it with the flat, honest delivery of a man who has been carrying a thing for a long time and has just decided to put it down somewhere, not because he wants to, but because the weight of it has become unreasonable. Eleanor looked at him. "Cole, it's your land." "I know that." "Then tell him that, not unkindly, but plainly." She kept her voice even. "The north pasture is what takes your cattle through a hard winter. Sell that, and you're not simplifying. You're just choosing a different set of problems." He looked at the road. "You think I should write him?" "I think you already know what you want to do. You're just waiting for someone to confirm that you're allowed to do it." She paused. "You're allowed, Cole. It's your land." The wagon rolled on. She heard him exhale slow and controlled the exhale of a man letting something loose that he has been holding tightly for reasons that no longer quite hold up under examination. "All right," he said. They reached the ranch as the last light went, and the kitchen was warm, because Red had fired the range before they got back, and Hatch had set the table without being asked, and Eric had brought in extra wood and stacked it neatly beside the door. And Eleanor stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at all of it, at the small accumulated evidence of people learning how to take care of things, and felt something she could not entirely name. She named the parts she could. The satisfaction of work that held. The particular feeling of a place becoming incrementally, and without ceremony, a home. The knowledge that the women in that Thursday meeting would run a better cooperative stores program because she had been in the room and said a true thing plainly. And Cole at the table with a sheet of paper and a pen writing to his brother in Denver with the focused, settled expression of a man who has made a decision and is no longer arguing with himself about it. That was the night the letter came from Drummond. Not from Denver. From Drummond himself, already in Black Hollow, already at the hotel a day early. The note arrived by hand, a boy from town on a fast horse, and it was addressed to Cole Mercer, and said that Mr. Drummond looked forward to seeing the North Pasture Thursday, and had heard from Gerald Mercer that the timing for the sale was agreed upon. Cole read it twice. Then he set it on the table. Eleanor, who had been updating the household account book across the table, watched his face go through something, a tightening, a particular kind of controlled anger that she recognized as the anger of a man who has been moved without his consent. Gerald told him it was agreed, Cole said. Yes. She kept her voice steady. It was not agreed. He was not raising his voice. He was doing the opposite the way some men do when they are most serious. I never told Gerald it was agreed. I know. He looked at her. His eyes were dark and very direct. I have to go to town tomorrow and tell Drummond the sale is not happening. Yes, she said. Gerald is going to take that badly. Probably. She held his gaze. Do it anyway. He looked at her for a long, steady moment. Then he picked up the pen and finished the letter to his brother, and she went back to the account book, and the fire burned down in the range and outside the Colorado. Night was cold and clear and full of stars. And inside the Mercer Ranch kitchen, two people sat at the same table and did their work, and did not say everything they were thinking, but knew both of them, with the quiet certainty of things that do not need to be spoken to be true, that the distance between them had been closing for weeks, and was not now very far at all. Cole rode to town the next morning before 7 alone, and Eleanor did not ask to come. She understood, without being told, that this was something he needed to do himself, the kind of reckoning that a man has to face on his own terms, or it doesn't count. She stayed at the ranch and worked because work was what she did when she was waiting for something she could not control, and she was honest enough with herself to admit that she was waiting. She updated the cooperative store's draft with the revised language from the Thursday meeting. She worked through the weekly supply order with Eric, who had, as she predicted, become quietly indispensable at the accounting table without ever quite acknowledging that this was what was happening. She started the midday meal and let Hatch help without hovering over him, and Hatch produced a creditable pot of beans with only 2 questions and one near disaster involving the salt measure that they resolved without drama. Red sat on the porch through most of the morning doing leather repair and said nothing, but she noticed he was sitting where he could see the road. Cole came back at 11:30. He came into the kitchen, hung his coat and his hat on the peg by the door, and sat down at the table. He had the look of a man who has done a hard thing and is not sorry he did it. Drummond's gone, he said. Eleanor set a mug of coffee in front of him. And Gerald? I wrote the letter last night, sent it with the morning stage. He wrapped both hands around the mug. He's not going to like it. No. He's going to write back and tell me I'm making a mistake. Probably. And I'm going to write back and tell him the North Pasture is not for sale and the matter is settled. He looked up at her. Because it is. Eleanor looked at him steadily. Yes, she said. It is. Something in his shoulders released a tension that she had been watching him carry since the letter arrived, and he sat differently in the chair, more fully, more like a man who was in a place that belonged to him and knew it. Red came in from the porch for coffee, took one look at Cole's face and said, "North Pasture staying." "North Pasture's staying," Cole said. Red poured his coffee, nodded once, and went back to the porch. That was the entirety of the conversation, and it was enough, and Eleanor thought this is what it looks like when men trust each other. Short, plain, and complete. The weeks that followed moved differently than the first weeks had. The urgency of the supper was gone. The emergency of the storm was behind them. What remained was the ordinary life of the ranch in deep winter, slower, quieter, closer, and Eleanor found that she moved through it with an ease she had not anticipated. She had been braced in those first days for the ordinary to become grinding, for the small space of a working ranch kitchen to feel like a confinement. She had spent her adult life managing other people's households, and she knew the particular loneliness of being the most capable person in a room that was not yours. She had expected that here. What she found instead was something she did not have a ready word for. The closest she could come was fit. The way a well-made thing fits the purpose it was built for, not because it was forced into shape, but because the shape was right from the beginning. She ran the kitchen and the household accounts. She attended the cooperative stores meetings and the town planning sessions that Mrs. Calloway had begun, including her in, as a matter of course. She taught Hatch the preservation schedule and walked Eric through a full month of account management until he could run it alone, and she watched both young men grow into their competence with the quiet satisfaction of someone who understands that building people up is its own kind of work and not a lesser one. Cole moved alongside all of it, present, consistent, attentive, in the way she had come to recognize as his particular form of care. He refilled her coffee. He came to find her when the day was done. He brought her information the way a man brings a thing to the person he trusts with it. The news from neighboring ranches, the updates from the county land office, the occasional letter from Gerald in Denver that arrived with predictable regularity and predictable displeasure, which Cole read, set aside, and did not let govern him. Gerald Mercer turned out to be the twist that Eleanor had not fully anticipated. He arrived in January without warning. She heard the wagon before she saw it. An unfamiliar sound on the drive. Midday on a Tuesday. And when she looked out and saw the man climbing down from it, she knew before Cole said a word who it was. Gerald Mercer was 10 years older than Cole, broader through the shoulders, with the same dark coloring, and the kind of well-kept appearance that said Denver money and deliberate presentation. He looked at the ranch house the way a man looks at a property he is mentally assessing, and then he looked at Eleanor, who had come out onto the porch because she had been raised not to let visitors stand in a yard unacknowledged, and his expression went through something rapid and complex. Cole came out behind her. "Gerald." "Cole." Gerald's eyes moved from his brother to Eleanor and back again. "I thought I'd come and discuss this in person, since the letters don't seem to be making any progress." His voice was smooth, pleasant even. The pleasantness of a man who is accustomed to getting what he wants through social management rather than direct confrontation. "There's nothing to progress," Cole said. "I told you, the land isn't for sale, and I'm telling you the offer Drummond is willing to make. Gerald." Cole's voice was level and final, in the way Eleanor had heard it be level and final in the mercantile the day Teague had looked at her wrong. "Come inside. Eleanor will make coffee, and we'll sit down, and I will explain to you once why the North Pasture is not part of this conversation." Gerald looked at Eleanor again. Something in his look was not hostile. Exactly. He was too careful for hostility, but it was assessing in a way that said he was trying to understand what she was and what her presence meant, and whether it was a variable he needed to account for. Eleanor met his eyes pleasantly and held the door open. "The coffee's fresh," she said. "Come in." He came in. The conversation that followed lasted 2 hours. Eleanor was not in the room for most of it. She was in the kitchen then, in the study updating records, then back in the kitchen. But the house was not large, and she heard the shape of it even when she could not hear the words. Cole's voice, steady and unhurried, the same note throughout. Gerald's voice cycling through approaches, the way a man cycles through tools when the first one doesn't work. Reason, then persuasion, then something that edged toward pressure. She heard Cole say at one point clearly, "This ranch was Mother's work as much as mine, and I will not sell pieces of it to simplify a ledger." And she heard Gerald say, after a pause, "You sound different." And Cole say, "I reckon I am." Another pause. Then, Gerald's voice changed. "Is it the woman?" Eleanor went very still in the kitchen. Cole said, "It's me. Eleanor has nothing to do with the land decision. But if you're asking whether having someone here who thinks clearly and says true things has changed how I see my own situation, then yes, probably." The silence that followed was long enough that Eleanor had to remind herself to breathe. Gerald came into the kitchen 20 minutes later. Cole was behind him. Gerald looked at Eleanor with the expression of a man who has lost an argument he did not expect to lose and is reprocessing the terms of the situation from a new angle. "Cole tells me you managed the harvest supper," he said. "I helped coordinate it," Eleanor said. "A lot of people did the work." "He tells me you sheltered over 100 people through the November storm." "The ranch did. And the community." Gerald looked at her for a moment. Then he said with the careful, slightly reluctant quality of a man giving credit that costs him something, "You're not what I expected." "No," Eleanor said. "I don't imagine I am." He left that afternoon. He was not warm when he left. Gerald Mercer did not appear to do warm easily, but he shook Cole's hand, and he nodded to Eleanor, and he said at the wagon that he supposed the north pasture was Cole's decision to make. He said it the way a man says a thing he has accepted without being reconciled to it, which Eleanor thought was probably the best that was available from Gerald and was on balance enough. Cole came back inside and stood in the kitchen and let out a breath that seemed to come from somewhere deep and long-held. "That's done," he said. "Yes," Eleanor said. "It is." He looked at her across the kitchen. The winter light was coming through the window behind her pale and clean, and the range was warm, and the coffee was on, and the account book was open on the table, and the ranch was quiet around them, held in the particular stillness of a January afternoon, when the work of the day is done, and the evening has not yet begun. He crossed the kitchen. He stopped in front of her close enough that she had to look up to meet his eyes, and she did. And what she saw in his face was not the managed, careful expression she had catalogued in the first weeks. It was open. It was certain. It was the face of a man who has decided something and is not second-guessing it. "Eleanor," he said. "Cole. I need to say something and I need you to hear it straight." "All right." He reached out and took both her hands in his, the way he had taken her hand onto the wagon bench plainly, without theater, as if it were simply the right thing to do, and he had finally stopped finding reasons to wait. His hands were warm. They were always warm. She had not stopped noticing that. "I brought you here because I needed someone to run this house," he said. "That is the truth. And you have done that. You've done it better than I had any right to expect or ask for. But that is not what this is anymore. You know that, and I know that, and I am done pretending otherwise." Eleanor looked at him. She felt her heart doing something careful and hopeful in her chest. The thing she had been keeping watch over since November, since the morning she stepped off the stage into the cold and planted her feet in the mud of Black Hollow and refused to step back. "What is it then?" she asked, quietly, knowing, needing to hear him say it. "It's you," he said, simply, completely. "You're what this is. You're what I want. Not a housekeeper, not a hired hand, not a practical arrangement. You. Whatever you're willing to give Eleanor, and I will earn the rest." The kitchen was very still. Outside, the January wind moved across the Colorado high country, cold and clean and indifferent. The way weather always is, it does not care what is happening inside the houses it passes. But inside the Mercer Ranch kitchen, something was happening that the wind had no part of. Eleanor looked at Cole Mercer, this careful, stubborn, decent man, who had looked at her wrong once and had been making it right every day since, and she felt something in her chest open fully for the first time in longer than she could accurately name. Not cautiously, not provisionally. Fully. The way a door opens when you have finally stopped being afraid of what is on the other side. "You already have it," she said. "You've had it for a while. I just needed to be sure you knew what you were asking for." He squeezed her hands. "I know exactly what I'm asking for." "Then yes," she said. "Yes, Cole." He did not let go of her hands. He stood in the kitchen with both of her hands in his and looked at her with the expression of a man who has just received something he is not going to take for granted. And Eleanor looked back at him and understood with the full settled clarity of a woman who has spent her entire life knowing her own value without always being able to make others see it, that he saw her. All of her. The competence and the capability and the years of hard work and the careful heart she had been protecting since long before Black Hollow, and he was not daunted by any of it. He was, if anything, the better for it. Red came in from the yard. 10 minutes later, saw them standing in the kitchen, took in the scene, in the particular way of a man who has been quietly watching for something for weeks, and is very satisfied to see it arrive. He poured himself coffee. He sat down at the table. He did not say a single word, but the look on his weathered face was the look of a man who has been proven right and considers that sufficient. Hatch appeared in the doorway, looked at Cole, and Eleanor looked at Red and said, "Did something happen?" "Yes," Red said. "Good something or bad something?" "Good something." Red picked up his coffee. "Set the table, Hatch. 4 places." "4?" Hatch counted on his fingers. "That's me, you, Eric, who's the 4th?" Red looked at Eleanor. Eleanor looked at Cole. Cole looked at Hatch with the expression of a man who is in an extraordinarily good mood and is choosing to find this funny. "Miss Vane isn't sitting at a separate table in her own kitchen anymore," Cole said. "Set 4 places." Hatch's face opened into a wide, uncomplicated grin. "Yes, sir," he said, and went to do it. And that was how it was from then on. Eleanor Vane sat at the table she had worked for and earned in the house she had made into a home, beside the man who had looked at her wrong once and spent every day since looking at her right. The ranch ran well. The cooperative stores program ran well. Clara Webb became the kind of friend that Eleanor had not known she needed until she had her, the kind that tells you the truth and means it. The community of Black Hollow, which had watched her off the stage with its particular small-town skepticism, came to understand over the course of that winter what it had in Eleanor Vane, and the understanding settled in quietly and completely and stayed. Gerald wrote again in February. The letter was shorter than the previous ones and notably different in tone. He said the land decision was Cole's to make. He said he hoped the ranch was doing well. He said he looked forward to meeting Miss Vane properly when he visited in spring. Cole read it at breakfast, folded it, and put it in his coat pocket. Eleanor looked at him across the table. He looked back. Neither of them needed to say anything about it. Eleanor Vane had come to Black Hollow, Colorado in November with a worn carpet bag and 31 years of learning how to survive in rooms that were not built for her. She had not come for love. She had come because she was practical and capable and because the work needed doing, and she knew how to do it. What she found in the kitchen she cleaned from scratch, in the storm she managed in the dark, in the table she set, and the accounts she balanced, and the community she helped build stronger than it had been before, was something she had not known to look for. A place where her competence was not tolerated but valued. A man who met her honestly and kept meeting her that way. A home that was hers because she had made it, and hers because she was wanted in it. And that is the kind of belonging that nobody can take from you once you have it. A woman's worth was never in how she looked walking off a stagecoach. It was in what she did when she got where she was going, and Eleanor Vane had always known exactly what to do.